Hello and welcome to the PhD Life Raft podcast. I'm Emma Brzezinski and today I am talking to the amazing Brian Lobel. I met Brian as his PhD examiner and today we talk about that. We also talk about Brian's experience as a kind of accidental PhD researcher and what he learned from going through that process. So I do hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, Brian.
Hello.
You're freaking me out now because I thought you weren't there. Hello, it is truly a pleasure to be speaking to you on this fine day. It's always lovely to say hello to you. I'm going to confess straight away that we know each other. And a big way that we know each other is that I was your PhD examiner. So here we are as proof that you can be friendly with a PhD examiner. It's possible. It can work out.
It's possible, maybe even encourageable.
There you go.
And it is true also, I should say, that before my PhD Viva, when thinking about who I really wanted to connect with, to share my work with, you were the person that I really wanted to connect with. So we didn't know each other before the Viva, but I think you were the right person for that job, because also in reading my PhD and in having you as the examiner, we could actually forge a really interesting professional relationship moving forward. So I guess that's tip number one for the Life Raft.
Oh, I know
you
straight in there with the tips. I love it.
Sorry.
Wow. You're a value for money guest. I like it. No, it's true, and I think actually this is really true. And I'm going to just stay with this for a minute. Before, it was very generous of you to not start speaking of your story straight away. But this is very true in terms of thinking about who you would like to know about your work, and because your examiner ideally is someone who welcomes you into the field, who can really see how that work fits in the bigger context. And so, we talk a lot about choosing examiners on the podcast, and it is really important.
I know, I just want to say, the more you can think of it as a conversation with people who you're hoping will be your peers, and less of an exam in which you have to get your questions right, is actually makes for a much more interesting Viva and a much more interesting career post Viva.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. It's very, very true. And this is the thing, it's truly pleasurable as an examiner I only agree to examine things that I'm really interested in. So that sense
of a lot of work.
Yeah, exactly. But the payoff as an examiner is this. This is cutting edge material. It's really interesting. So yeah, I think this is a really important point to start with. Yeah. So absolutely. Yes, it was great to meet you and to read your work, which was brilliant. And we're going to put links to your work in the show notes, and I would recommend that people have a look at the range of material that you produced. Let's backtrack a little bit then, because we always start with asking people about their journey into the PhD, through the PhD. So tell us a little bit about you.
So I did my PhD purely because I needed a visa. And I like to start by sharing that, because it is 100% true. Just to backtrack a little bit, I was in 2003 or so, I wrote a play about my experience with cancer in America that toured the US and Canada quite extensively. And then at 25, I had to leave my parents' insurance because of this was a time before Obamacare in America. And before you used to be able to pay into a parent's insurance, but then at 25 you had to go independent. So I had to, despite the fact that I was touring 40 cities a year, talking to medical students and nurses and doctors about my experience with cancer, and I hope being helpful in the world. The United States lack of health insurance meant that I couldn't be a freelancer at that point. I had to go in. So I was like, well, I have to go get a master's degree. I'll come. Then I discovered that I could do my master's degree much cheaper in London than I could do it in the US, because it was a 1-year degree in the UK as opposed to a 2-year degree. But then there used to be also this thing where you could extend your visa for an extra year after the master's to work in the UK. That was canceled when the time that I got here. So I know that this is a long story, but the reason why I'm telling it is that I actually signed up to do a PhD because I needed a visa. And the only reason why that's important is because I am not a traditional academic. I did not achieve in a traditional way in school. I did okay in school, but mostly through kind of enthusiasm and charm, as opposed to book knowledge and analytic skills. But I was an artist, and I was doing art in a space that there wasn't a lot of people in. And so the people at Queen Mary were really enthusiastic about me moving from a master's to a PhD. I originally did something about, I don't know, pain and the spectacle of pain. I was studying something that was kind of based on the work of Elaine Scarry. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, why do I have this career as an artist who's making work about his own personal experience of lived experience of cancer and performativity of cancer stories, and doing a PhD that's so deeply disconnected? And so I really decided to align those things with really good encouragement from my PhD supervisors, who were Lois Weaver and, of course, the late, great Catherine Silverstone. And they really encouraged me to say, like, your practice is already raising interesting questions about the field. So why don't you use that as really the starting point of a PhD? And then my experience of doing a PhD was, I found, like a great privilege, because in some ways, and I didn't do a practice-based PhD, I did an analytic PhD, traditional 85,000 words, but that used some of my own practice as, if not case studies, as kind of starting points for how we can move this, understanding that a lot of the feminist and kind of queer theory that I was drawing from and inspired by really always tried to encourage the positionality of the researcher at the forefront of the research, which is kind of what I was doing. So that was my journey of doing my PhD. I was not funded by the Queen Mary. I received a small maintenance grant, which is, I think, maybe £5,000 or £6,000 a year, for which I had to do £5,000 or £6,000 worth of teaching. This is the kind of thing that I think sometimes, like, an Italian engineering student will get a PhD and will have their fees waived if they agree to do a little Italian teaching, which, of course, is a ridiculous way to understand how language is taught. But I think a lot of universities use that kind of model, which there was a lot that was bad about that. And I couldn't have done that if I weren't a single man without dependents. I could have never done that.
Right.
But there was also a really positive element in that it really encouraged my artistic practice. I did get a Wellcome Trust funding in the first year of my PhD studies, which enabled a lot of other work, including my PhD. So I'm trying to find the silver lining in the cloud of not having funding in that way. Right. But the other thing was that it encouraged me to teach, and I had to teach 7 classes, 4 of which I led. Like, I taught on 3 classes and I led on 4.
Wow.
That I had my Viva on May 1st with you, Emma. And the next day I had a job interview, and I got a job that day. which happened to be a lovely coincidence. But I think that also the fact that I had so much teaching under my belt separated me a lot from a PhD student who might teach 2 classes or maybe 3 in their time. But that was my journey.
Wow.
And I guess the one other piece I'll just say quickly is that I really, instead of breaking up my PhD into a lot of chapters that could be published, I kind of condensed most of the arguments into one of those theater and cancer books, which is like one of those small 80 page, really like not easy read books, but they're meant for kind of a general public. And I really loved the process. So that was kind of the finishing point of my PhD, which didn't come until 7 years later. But that was exciting for me to think about that in the continuum. I'm sorry, I've talked too long.
No, that's brilliant.
Sorry.
No, there's lots of really, really important things in there.
Thank you.
And we're going to come back to being this kind of accidental PhD student in a minute.
Yeah.
These issues about finding your place, these issues finding your place within the discourse, but also finding the kind of the whole funding situation, and being able to. This is going to become more and more of a challenge for people, and I love that you've given a kind of the positive aspects of that in terms of getting the teaching experience, but of course there's lots that we want to talk about in terms of the way in which people may be exploited, or there's precarity, there's precarity in that system.
Absolutely.
But I think that acknowledging that I think it is important within that to acknowledge that there are experiences that you can have on your PhD journey, experiences of teaching, for example, that can be really, really useful for you. Although they kind of run parallel to your research work, they can be useful. Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's always a way you can make your non-PhD activities relevant to your PhD if you try really hard and you're really ruthless about the frames in which you teach, the references you make, the syllabi that you're creating, the ways that you're talking to tutees. Like all of these different ways are ways for you to think through some of those essential questions of your PhD. And the reason why I think those would also make you a good teacher is if you're teaching really from your passion, your students will get that. If you can really honestly say to your students, something that I'm interested in right now and something that I've got questions about, if that's real, that's really inspiring for an undergraduate student, a master's student, really inspiring. And they want it. So I think we can be, as a community, even more encouraging, just say like PhD should really teach kind of towards the material that they're working on, even in small ways, even in really small ways.
I love it. Yeah, well, like you say, even if it's just the questions that you have about that material. Anyway, I want to come back to this not intending to undertake a PhD.
Yeah.
And being quite, I guess, instrumental about the PhD. And then how that was, because you were an artist. You had your practice, you had a body of work, literally a body of work, no pun intended. And then you come into this process, and I say, as you said, it wasn't practice based. It was kind of a lot of writing and reflecting on the work. And I remember in the Viva, one of the things that we asked you was, what did you learn from this, from undertaking this kind of this survey and inquiry? So I'm going to ask you that again now.
Oh my God!
With the benefit of kind of further distance from that. What did you learn, do you think, from the PhD?
I learned about the essential, as in critical, as in deeply important nature of the patient voice in research. And I know that when I do work with doctors and nurses, there's an increasing interest in PPI, or whatever it's called, patient and participant-led research, PLP, they're all called different things. But I think that it's essential to academic and creative inquiry that can also be really rigorous. I think that what I learned was that doing the PhD, I both needed to lead with myself and lead with my heart and my own stories and experience, but also to be very deeply rigorous, to question whether I was, always a stable narrator or whether I was correct. And I think the greatest academia that centers those things also does that. I'm thinking about Jackie Stacey really situating herself in her practice and in her research, but also and not being afraid to say this was my experience, but also saying, and in my reading, I found that 60% of people share this experience. I think that the problem that a lot of people have right now with Instagram-led research and kind of a lot of social media is that people say this is my experience and therefore it has to be honored and respected,
right.
Which in many ways I agree with, but I think that I think academic study puts an extra layer inside of that, which is, this is my experience. I'm going to read around whether that is shared by a lot of people, shared by not a lot of people, if it's exceptional, if it's not exceptional, what it teaches us, etc., to then say it is important. So it gives that extra layer of rigor, of kind of questioning that doesn't just say, I feel, therefore I am correct. But I feel, therefore I research, therefore I'm correct.
Yes, and I think this sense of your from reading your work, which around kind of theatre and health performance activism and health activism, this sense of having that place of reflection, being able to sort of take, as you say, a different perspective on the work. Actually, there was if I'm putting words into your mouth, but kind of the gift of that in terms of being able to look at the material from a different point, a different place.
Absolutely. Because if I want to make some large claims about what it means to have cancer, I need to have spent time thinking about not only what it meant to be a 20-year-old middle-class white American Jewish queer guy, but what does it mean for other people? If I believe that the experience that I had was deeply rooted intersectionally with a lot of different identities, I need to think about how that would be with different equations that lead to different identities and lead to different pressures pulling in different ways. And for me, relating my work to Audre Lorde and putting our work in relationship to each other, that doesn't mean that we're the same. It doesn't mean that we're different at everything. It means that we can share some details. But that's the same as putting my work next to Lance Armstrong's or Jackie Stacey's or Susan Sontag's or Jade Goody's. I'm trying to do all of those things. And what is exciting about academic research, about something that you care about and something that's personally meaningful, is that a good PhD supervisor and or a good examiner will really question you on that and say, yeah, I'm sure that was true for you, Brian, but what can the world learn from that truth in a meaningful way? And that doesn't question the individual voice. It actually, it lets us in some ways problematize or nuance or expand the individual voice in a meaningful way.
And I think this sense of having that space and being able to make use of that, which I saw that you had done, this sense of drawing together a wealth of material, synthesizing material, as you say, addressing with great rigor and reflection on your own work and the work of other people, but this sense of your PhD journey as one of the journey as an opportunity and a gift of reflection. And I think that sometimes people feel that it can't be enjoyable and it can't be something that actually allows them to take pleasure in what they're doing. And I think that this sense of the work that you did and the richness of that seemed to come through you savouring the material that you were working with. Do you think that's fair enough? Or
I hope so. I mean, the world of HE, higher education, PhDs, etc., whatever it's called for whoever's listening, is too precarious, too underwhelmingly paid for people to not have meaningful, fun times during this career. Mm-hmm. It is a huge privilege to work in academia. And I don't mean that there's not ways that people are not deeply exploited. Mm. Privilege related to being in academia is that someone cares about your thoughts. Mm-hmm. Someone cares enough to examine your PhD, to supervise you, to set up the programs, the citation programs that you need to do your PhD. All along the way, there's privilege that someone cares about what you are to put into the world, which I know a lot of people that work very hard for a lot less money than academics do, who would never be valued for their opinions, creative, intellectual, etc. So it's a huge privilege. And I think we should honor that by taking that up and being very clear about what it provides us with. This is the reason why I'm doing that. If you can't have an intentionality with your PhD or think that the world is going to be, even in a small way, a better place after the world than when you started it, then I would really deeply encourage you to not do it. Because it's just simply, it's too underwhelming a path unless there's some deep connection with that work and deep meaning. I know you have found deep meaning through your academic practice, Emma. And I know people that work in philosophy, which might not have the immediate day-to-day use value that something like, mechanical engineering has or virology has. But in every subject, you should want to make the world a better place, because the question that you're asking and answering is important to people. It's not theoretical. Of course, it's theoretical, but it's not. It's not of use. And the reason why, once that's all aligned, it's easier for you to get on board. It's easier for your family who are sacrificing to support you to do a PhD in every way. Even if you are funded, people are making sacrifices, all for you to add your thoughts into the world. Yeah. That's a huge privilege. And I think if we can just identify that really with how we wish to contribute to the world being a better place, I think that's a critical piece.
Oh, I love that. And I also think it can really help. I absolutely agree. And I think it can really help people with it to be motivated. Because if you don't think what you're doing is of value, then of course you're not going to want to put it down on a piece of paper and get someone else to have a look at it. Whereas if there is that passion there and you believe in it and that it's going to make however small a difference you think it might be just changing the discourse. It might be just addressing something that you can see there that's going on, and you think something different should be attended to. That sense of making a difference and then wanting to get it out there, that can help you to get up in the morning and get on with what you need to do.
Absolutely. I mean, the crassest question that gets asked about this is, who cares? But actually, what's great is to have an answer to the question, who cares? I care. And these 10 people care, because this is going to make a difference in how we receive vaccines, how we watch TV, how we do dance, and actually just saying, who cares? If you have an answer for that question, every PhD student should come armed with a 1-sentence description of their PhD, because everyone always asks what you're studying. And you should also have an answer to the question of who cares, or how does the world change because of it? You need a 1-sentence answer to that. And if you can't have it, then you will be embarrassed every time someone asks you those questions. But they will ask you those questions. So you may as well just find an answer to them and kind of frame your PhD so that it does actually address those things.
Love it. The PhD elevator pitch.
Well, there you are.
I love it. I love it. So is that, because we always ask for top tips, is that your top tip to have that ready? Or could you have another one for us?
I got another top tip. The one I've been really thinking about a lot recently is that you should always end your research or presentation or paper that you give at a conference. If they're 20 minutes, you should always aim to finish in 18 minutes. That was advice that I got from Nick Rideout.
Yes.
And 18 minutes is roughly 2,800 words. So you should just put that as a really external factor to say 2,800 words. Don't do 2,900 and say you'll talk fast, because that sucks. Just do 2,800 and get everything in there. But you should still, even with this shortened period, have a minute dedicated to what's next in your research. And the reason why is because every PhD student understands that the more you research, the more you create more research, right? The more questions you ask, the more questions that you're led to, and it can become an infinite process. In kind of acknowledgement of that infinite process, if you dedicate a minute to what's next, it means that you don't have to cover everything in 18 minutes, because who the could? And why should one be expected to? But it also gets, so in some ways it's a little bit of a inauthenticity, right? Because sometimes you can shovel some questions you weren't quite able to untangle in the presentation. So there's both an excuse, but then if you're a PhD student or you're an early career researcher, when you're saying what's next, you're saying these are the things that are not fully formed. If there are people in this room, if there are people that are reading this article and you want to get involved, now's the time to get involved, because it's not written yet. Maybe we'll work together. Maybe we'll apply for something together. And it gets people invested in your journey. And it also motivates you to say, you know what? I'm just writing this thing right now. I'm writing this chapter, this talk. I'm going to put this really interesting point in my what's next category. Because if you're anything like me, Emma, or your listeners are anything like me, you'll get really excited about an idea in the middle of your research.
Oh, yeah.
You'll abandon your research to deal with that new question, and you won't have done that important thing that you were supposed to do, but you'll follow the next flashy thing. It's like that Twitter meme with the guy twisting his head, right? He's got a girlfriend in one hand and he turns around. You know that classic.
Yeah.
That if you can just say, you know what, I'm going to put this exciting piece of work into my what's next category and just focus on what I'm doing. Because we as academics actually forget to stop and take kind of account for where we're at all the time. And we just always going next. The world, of course, needs innovation, but it also needs really good accounting for where we are. So that's why I think this what next strategy is my top tip.
Oh, I love that. Well, I love two things about that. Nobody, like you say, no one's ever going to be upset if you're too short.
No.
Everyone's happy. But this sense of the journey and inviting people into your journey, and that you don't have to get, things will never be finished. Like you say, it's an evolving story, and acknowledging that and giving yourself some permission and breathing space with that. Oh, brilliant. Brian, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for the brilliant work you do. And as I say, we'll have a link to that so people can follow up the work that you do, important work and inspiring work that you do. And thank you so much for your generosity of spirit and gorgeous energy.
And thank you for yours, Emma.
Bless you. And thank you all for listening.